Did we want to start with quick introductions? I don't know if everybody who's attending today attended last time, but I thought the speakers could quickly introduce themselves.
Yes, that was actually the next step.
And while we're introducing the whole put your name in the, or they were going to do the self-directed Zoom.
Yeah, we're doing the self-directed, so it's okay.
And we can
since I opened my mouth, I'm Taylor Stockton from RH2 Engineering. You'll hear from me a little bit on the infrastructure part of the gap analysis.
Allison, go for it.
I'm Allison Perch. I'm with Hart Krauser and Salus Resilience and the project manager for the team.
How about Kent?
Hey, good morning. This is Kent Yu. I'm with the SEF Consulting Group. I'm a structural earthquake engineer.
And Hannah?
Hi, I'm Hannah Ferris. I'm with RH2 Engineering, and I've been assisting on the GIS mapping.
And I'm Nikki Pozos. I'm going to be helping facilitate today. And yeah, so we're going to jump into, I think, the actual project status. Go for it, Allison.
So thanks, Nikki. I actually had some slides put together for this. So the purpose for today's workshop, we're moving along in our in the Emergency Drinking Water Framework project. Today we're going to introduce you to kind of our geographic isolation concept. We're going to talk about the survey results and our data collection, and then present the initial gap analysis that we've done based on that data. So next slide, Melissa. Our agenda, introductions, which we just did. Talk a little bit about the project status, and then we'll go through the pieces of the project that we want to present to you and get your input on, and then talk about next steps. Next. So for your refreshment, we have 7 stages that we're going through in this framework approach. We've looked at existing plans and policies and resources, and then we are in the middle of 2, 3, 4, and 5. The survey results actually had a lot to do with all of those things. So we are currently in the process of writing 4 of the 7 sections. And then today we're talking about the initial results of the gap analysis and getting everybody's feedback in that. So next, once we finish our gap analysis, we'll go into the regional policies. So of the 3 workshops for this project, we're in workshop 2. The next one will be about January, when we actually talk about our results and start to look into regional policies to help solve the gaps that we've identified. Next. So jumping into the geographic isolation areas, Taylor and I worked on, this is a concept that actually, I don't know if any of you, the RRAP results are out for those of you that know that the State Resilience Officer, FEMA, and Department of Human Services for the state put together a transportation evaluation. And one of the things that has been floating around is the fact that we recognize, based on transportation systems in our geography, we're going to have isolated areas where we will have trouble getting goods and services and people in between those. And we recognize that that's going to happen in the region as well. So we've gone through and used the recent RDPO Emergency Transportation Project database that included some bridge data, some emergency transportation route data, as well as utilizing all the Dogami data about what we expect during a large earthquake. So this particular island event is more focused on like a CSZ event or a very large regional earthquake, but it could be analogous to others that would have large effects on bridges and geographic areas. So I am going to switch at this point over to my screen where I'm going to try. We have a web viewer that is under construction. We'll send this out for everybody to look at once we've got it a little bit further along, to use our GIS data. And so we have water districts identify all the different water districts identified. And then so let's take out. There we go. So water districts and the islands. Sorry, we have some additional data in here. So the main thing that these are based on is geography and transportation failures. So, or expected transportation failures. So these are the identified emergency transportation routes for the region by RDPO in one of their last projects. And during that project, we went and found two things. We looked at liquefaction and lateral spread for high hazard for liquefaction, which is generally around rivers and bridges. And then on top of that, we have ODOT data for the vulnerable bridges that are expected. And then we included landslides. So this makes a really ugly map. And if I take the water district fills off, you can see, might be a little bit better. So we've got some areas where we expect there to be quite a bit of geographic isolation based on this data. And so this is one of the things that we're going to ask everybody to talk about today, and looking at the islands within your county to see how it goes. Sorry, let me trying to turn off the liquefaction because that makes it really hard to see. But we identified some, sorry, as I make you all dizzy. Very touchy today. Identified islands that'll be separated geographically by some bad bridges, waterways. Obviously, you can see we expect the Willamette and the Columbia to be pretty big barriers. There's the West Hills that have landslide issues, as well as just some weak overpasses and bridges. And so what it ends up being is we have some pretty large areas in the metro areas where we have a lot of alternative transportation routes. And then we get into some islands out in the rural. I'm sorry, I don't know why it's so sensitive today. It wasn't a minute ago when I was practicing. And then we get isolated areas out in the rural areas as well. So this is how we are looking at emergency prep, is bringing in the data that we got from each water district as we go through, and then looking at how those groups are sorted into islands based on where we expect the isolation to happen.
I guess is there anyone we are going to be in a moment splitting into breakout groups by county to talk about the specifics of the islands, but I am curious if anyone has any general questions about the islands. And you can either put your hand up in the Zoom or you can drop a comment in there. I see Russ.
And I should clarify, I'll give it to Russ in just a second. Okay. This was also done by the RRAP studies that is just out in the last couple months. And so I'll be working with RDPO to request that GIS data to check and see how we did in comparison to what they looked at, but we looked at the same things that they did. Go ahead, Russ.
Okay, my question is just the outlines of the service areas, like just looking at Clark County and what's labeled CR1. Those don't really align with the actual service areas for the utilities. Is that intentional, or is there some other basis that you're using for those?
I can answer a little bit, Russ. So Russ, what we looked at, right, is that admittedly it was a little tougher to decide how to depict it in Clark County. And so what you see represented as, for instance, CR1 here is looking at kind of where are the major distribution piping instead of so it's an attempt to get at your goal there, right, of representing the distribution area. We realize that Clark, right, covers Clark Public Utilities, covers Clark County, and so it's we could have colored a lot more of the county, right? Am I? Oh, and you're a little bit muted there, but am I starting to get at an answer for you there?
Yeah, exactly. I was just curious if that was intentional or if it was just based on some bad data.
Yeah, and I think when we get to the individual county breakouts, one thing people can do is provide any specific feedback they have on either the islands or how those boundaries were shown for specific utilities. So I think people are welcome to give that feedback. I also saw Delora, you had your hand up, but maybe you put it down again.
Well, and while Delora's considering, I guess I would say that a general piece of information about these islands is that, you know, we looked at the natural hazard side, like of what Allison was going through, and then we attempted to sort of overlay, okay, but where are the distribution areas? And so in some places, like I said, that was a little easier than others.
Yeah, so my question had to do, and maybe it's that we didn't have a letter number for Wilsonville, but is it because it's the same color green? It's supposed to be Sherwood Tualatin, the W4?
Yes.
Okay.
And when we get into the counties, you'll see that in more detail. I also am just going to note that on the handout, there's a handout for each county. And when you go to your county handout, you will see a listing of all the water providers by each island grouping in the county. So if people are wanting to look themselves up too, if you can't see yourself easily on this scale of map. So shall we return to the presentation or?
Yep, I think it's just next going into the exercise. So we
Okay,
can
great.
go through the exercise. So Melissa, I think I'm done.
So we are indeed going into those breakout groups we keep promising. So each group is going to be facilitated by one of the project team members, like it was last time. And the tasks that you have are to review the islands in your county. Are there any that are surprising? Do you have feedback for the project team? And if you're very, very fast at doing that, you can have a discussion about, do the islands in your county make you think differently about emergency preparedness at all? There's going to be 12 minutes in the breakout rooms. We're doing them a little differently this time in that you're going to self-select the group that you want to join. So do you want to go ahead, Melissa, and open the breakout room so people can see breakout room in the bottom? So once she opens them, in your menu along the bottom of your Zoom, you should now see there's something that says breakout rooms. So if you hit that, you should see all these different counties and you should be able to hit join for the county that you want to join.
Excellent.
And you can go ahead and do that now and you will join everyone in your room.
And while you're going there, note that there are a few things circled on your island maps, things we thought were especially questionable. All right, see you there.
Still not used to breakout room just leaving, making you go away.
I know, that was rude.
Kent was having some really very insightful discussion in our side.
You will get to be back with your breakout group again shortly. So to look at more data. So Melissa, I think you can share the, oh yeah, go to probably the first, the first mural board. I was trying to come up with Clackamas County is alphabetically first.
Okay, just one moment.
I don't remember which of our team was in Clackamas County. Was that you, Taylor?
Yep.
Did you have any really, what were the main points to take away from your discussion?
I think, in summary, we looked at kind of the concept, right, that sometimes water districts like Clackamas River Water, right, are being broken into more than one island because of things like the river. So we just acknowledged that. And we sort of we talked a little bit about reservoirs. We're gonna hear a little bit more about that in a little bit. We do want to acknowledge that we're gonna have to, we are going to have to do some data follow-up, for instance, to figure out which side of the river some things are on when we broke things like Clackamas River Water in half. So, and just also kind of talked about regional faults. And that's how would the island be different if we were thinking about a regional earthquake, right? Some things would be similar, some things would be different, right? The things that would be similar is that, again, liquefiable areas are going to not do well, and so at least that part of the definition here that we're focused on in these regional cascade event type islands are going to translate. And well, you know, of course, we messed up Tigard. It should be part of Lake Oswego. Those partnership project facilities in this particular map. So we did catch something here.
But I guess this is more transportation driven than water driven.
Absolutely. Actually,
So,
that was a great conversation we had too.
okay.
Was that, again, the acknowledgement of islands is not so much based on the interconnection study, right, which has already been done, and saying how can water move around, but under the surface, but more, you know, surface related issues, bridges, transportation, et cetera. That's more how the islands got defined. Yep.
And that's why the reservoir piece is important.
Yes.
We were Clark, if you want to move over there. I think that we had just some discussion about, so Clark Public Utilities, they are similarly split into multiple pieces. So there's multiple pieces to the north, those tiny little bits, but those are in the same island. But then they do have areas like Yakult that are in their own island. So it was just differentiating between, you know, of course, they already have in their head that those are satellite systems, but the idea that some of the satellites are going to be more accessible than other ones. And then we just had some discussion about some other areas. Scott was on there and he knew everything about the transportation study and was very informative for everybody, including myself. And I think one of the things we were talking about is from an emergency management perspective, you know, maybe having things like a resilient supply or resilient storage in every island might not be the right approach, that the right approach might be to know that there are some islands that don't have those things, and it might be more effective to move the people out of those smaller areas to somewhere where they can be served, versus thinking that we're trying to be well prepared to provide emergency water in every single island. So that was kind of where we left off the conversation.
Hannah?
Yeah. So Columbia County, just the main comment was that we had mislabeled City of Rainier, where it says City of Prescott there. So we'll need to change that and add in City of Prescott. And there's some discussion about just how isolated each of these islands really are. Those ones that are circled, City of St. Helens, McNulty, and Warren Water Association, I think it makes sense to combine into one island since they are fairly close to each other. But the rest are isolated, and it makes sense to have them each as their own islands.
Okay,
awesome.
For Multnomah County, we don't have very many islands, so it was a little bit easier, but we did discuss the fact that Portland Water Bureau especially ended up getting into 3 different islands just because they're lucky enough to span the Willamette River and the West Hills. And so one of the things we mentioned is that, and Taylor and I went back and forth on this a little bit, but continuing the island along the river in between the West Hills so that we would actually connect down further, so that downtown Portland is included with the pink island that you all see there, as opposed to with the West Hills, which makes sense. They could potentially even be their own island, but it's more likely that they would be connected to the pink island over the brown. So that was our main comment.
All right, this is Kent. I'm going to talk about Washington County. In Washington County, we went through the other islands. We felt that the city of Forest Grove and the city of Cornelius, currently they are formed as one group, one island, and we felt that they could be merged into island number 3, because the water over there are generally served by Joint Water Commission, and currently. The explanation seems like from the current definition of the island, it seems like there's maybe a bridge to the west of Hillsborough that could fail. That may be the reason, cause the issue. But from the water service providing perspective, there is a very strong connection between City of Forest Grove and Cornelius with the rest of the JWC service area. So that's something we're having some really good discussion on. The other pieces we want to there was a question related to how those county emergency routes, transportation routes, affect the water service restoration. How do we go around it? I believe, Alison, you were showing some of the integrate those layers into the GIS. So hopefully that information will be shared, and that some of the questions will be addressed. And there's also another question related to some of the local roads and bridges that could carry water lines. How is that being addressed? That's something we don't have an answer for right now, but we will talk about it afterwards. But in general, our we are definitely okay with the island definitions in Washington County. Back to you, Allison.
Okay, and I think it's back to the presentation and Nikki and Taylor.
So I think Taylor's doing this piece, and
yeah,
I'm actually going to leave and come back. So because I was having some technical difficulties.
We'll look forward to seeing you again shortly. Well, yeah. I want to, before we jump into the next page here, just wanted to say that I'm going to talk to you about the infrastructure part of the gap analysis, but a lot of what we're going to hit here in the next slide is true across each of what the others will be sharing with you. So next slide. Oh, back one. There we go. So just kind of as an overview, again, what is the gap? Right, we've been talking a lot about that today. We talked a little bit about this last time. It's not one of the bullet points here, but right, gaps, what we have versus what we might need. So you can do that on some things with infrastructure a little bit more quantitatively. Still a lot of gray area to more qualitative as we move on. So that's kind of the progression of things that you're going to see as we continue through this presentation. But especially on the, so you can look at that across the region and say, okay, well, for instance, how much resilient storage do we have? But we'll get into some of the examples in the islands, right, of why, well, but I probably should look at that by island because can't exactly teleport Kelly Butte or Palo Butte wherever I need it. So that's part of the idea of islands. So some of the analysis that you'll see here today is by island, some of it's by utility. We'll try to make sure we flag what the basis of the analysis is as we go on here, but those are several ways that you're going to see it come from us. I just want to acknowledge again that this is only preliminary. It's based on responses from about 60% of the utilities that are represented in sort of our evaluation level. And it also happens to be about 60% of the islands. Most of the respondents so far are mid to larger water districts, utilities, and so just consider that things might be skewed that direction a little bit. Just as an example, right, our median population served by the respondents is about 21,000. So there's going to be, we may get some additional data in from smaller populations. And there are some survey respondents are joint sources. All right, so this is one area of data we had to kind of think about, and we were talking about this, for instance, in the Clackamas breakout, that we had to do some parsing, that there's some data that we're using, some that we're not, to just avoid double counting, for instance, population or demand. But some, like the fact that JWC has those great resilient tanks next to the plant, we're making sure we count those. So there's some parsing that's happened with the data. More to do, yeah. Next slide. So as an example, and a good news headline, we have some, so let's just look at sort of the investments in seismic resilience, and that's kind of what we're mainly talking about here for resilience, seismic resilience across different categories of assets. So on the left you have survey respondents thus far, again, so just over 40. And that first stacked chart is storage, right? Do you have like most all your stuff upgraded? That, you know, 5 said yes. You know, you have some 27, you know, upgrades planned, etc. So really, so on resilient storage, we're doing great as a region. You'll see kind of when we think about it, and from an island standpoint, why that picture starts to change and where the gaps may be. But again, that's the good, one of the best news is in this chart, all the way across from, well, you know, not all that storage has seismic valves on it. We have fewer places where there's some resilient supply, and fewer yet where there is been more backbone. I guess you tell me, but maybe we would agree that back surgery is painful and expensive. But that's a little bit of a summary. So, okay, great that we have some good news. If we could take the next slide, though, and just think about that that bar chart that was resilient supply. Okay, so here's across all 5 of the counties. What does that look like by island? So again, your dark green is where the respondents are saying we've got, you know, all of our sources is seismic resilient. So that's the Lake Oswego Tigard work there. Again, that'll extend a little bit into Tigard. But what you begin to see is that, you know, there are areas, right, where we have, especially towards the outskirts, where we have less investment in seismic resilient sources. So if we, again, this is sort of the benefit of thinking about it across the islands. We'll show you a little bit more, some other ideas about that. But moving from the source to some storage in the next slide, we kind of did a regional analysis and said, again, if we took that good news headline of 370 million gallons of what folks said, okay, if it was about average fill volume, not necessarily design volume, and we total all of that, that's great. That's 370 across the region. Okay, well, let's say for a real emergency scenario, planning level, base water use of 2 gallons per person per day, how, you know, we're going to need, and then a population, again, this is just of the respondents, right? There's more in the counties, but in the respondents so far, that's 2.4 million. So that's 4.8 million gallons a day we would need. So, hey, that lasts 75 days. You know, so if you think about that in terms of a gap analysis, that's great. You know, like we have more than the several weeks before maybe some outside help shows up worth of water stored. And you start thinking about recovery times, you know, are we there yet? That's maybe a different question, but that's great. But one question about criticality is seismic valves. If you have that 370 of storage, but on that, as we saw, there's fewer seismic valves out there. If you have breaks to your distribution system, if you're fighting fires, you know, nonstop, what's going to happen to that water? So maybe if you only count the 62 million gallons stored behind seismic valves, then that math gets, you know, a little more concerning. You have 13 days of emergency water.
I think it does point out that even though we think of like, oh, we have 1 day or 2 average days of storage, and when we think about water on an emergency non-pipe scale, when we're talking about people walking to go get their water,
right.
you know, that is a huge, huge resource, you know, that would be difficult to replace with bottled water in that short-term period. Yeah. So, I mean, the first time I encountered these calculations, I always thought, wow, that's kind of surprising. It's hard for us to think like, oh, we could have 2 months of emergency water stored in our utilities. So it just shows how different things are when you think about emergency water use versus piped water use, and how that's a very different scenario, and what an incredible resource we have out there. So
yeah, no, it's a positive thing, and it might get a little bit more positive. We'll go back and forth as we get maybe more data in. We'll finalize some things from Portland Water Bureau. We have their major tanks, their major new projects in there, but there's probably some more. So next slide. So again, saying what's the benefit of looking at this by island? Let's actually, so we said, okay, let's look at where that seismic storage is, and we'll give you a bigger slide here, next slide, to actually look at that same bit of data. The thing to focus on here is the red, right? So this is like, there's not much bad news in that first colorful column, right? Again, we have some places, some islands, CM1, or with lots of storage. You know, CM14, I think that's, you know, Clackamas River Water and Friends. So they're like, there are places with lots of water stored, not very many red spots in the various counties. But then if you go and you say, okay, but again, how much do we have behind a seismic valve? You see a lot more red showing up. So this just shows some of the benefit of analyzing by island and thinking about the effect of that, since we can't necessarily count on moving water so easily from one area of resilient storage to another island.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I know that some providers don't use seismic valves, and I don't mean to call out Portland, but I think there was a conscious decision to not use them because there is a downside to that. So I'm just curious how that's factored in. And
well, so so there are different theories about seismic valves, and even the way the people that do use them think about them, right? You know, of course, maybe we're not going to put seismic valves in all of our tanks because we want to have some for, you know, this for fire, for et cetera. So there's certainly legitimate ways to go different directions. We were not able to, of course, display the nuance here. Just say, okay, is there seismic valves or not? And so I guess that's really all I can say. That's really all I can say here.
I would say I agree with the point, Rebecca, and I don't think we would consider all storage without seismic valves to just be lost. I think it's an interesting point of data, and obviously there's been a big drive towards people putting in seismic valves. Also, you have a huge gravity system and a lot of other systems. So, so yes, I think these are data, and one shouldn't just look at the second colored column and say red is absolutely bad. You have to look at both sets of data. So that's why I would say.
As Nikki was telling me, you know, the other day, you know, people can go and close a valve.
Right.
So there is that possibility.
I think overall this does show, though, that this region has really invested in seismically resilient storage, and how much that's going to pay off for us when it comes to emergency water. But we're not as strong in some other things, but this one we've done very well.
If you had to look at what the counterpoint data would be to the seismic valve, is it really this? Is it the sum of average seismic volume as the kind of alternative if you're not using seismic valves?
Yes, right. So, well, maybe clarify for me what you mean.
I guess I'm trying to understand based on the comments. So if we have a section of that doesn't use seismic valves because that was a policy purchasing decision. What does a utility look at? The seismic volume, because that the second column, I guess the second column, is that all the other seismic stuff that we could do that is outside of a seismic valve?
Correct. That second column, that sum of average seismic volume, is just saying, you know, what do you have stored in a resilient, what you've qualified as a resilient reservoir.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't say there's a cut and dry way to do it, Beth, but I would assume that you'd want to look at what your procedures are then for how you would be able to turn that off.
Right.
And you would be trying to minimize the time. And then for my own planning, I'd take a cut at it. Like, oh, based on how long we think it's going to take us to be able to shut that valve, I think it's going to be, we're going to maybe lose half. So we're going to use half as our planning value. I don't think there's going to be
half of seismic volume.
Half of seismic volume. Like I would, whereas if it was super isolated and I really question whether anyone was going to be able to go turn that off, if our SCADA failed or something, then maybe I would make it less. So unfortunately, I think you end up throwing a bit of a wag at it, but that's how I would approach it if I was thinking about that problem. And then if I'm not going to have seismic valves, I'm going to be thinking about, as an organization and procedurally, how do I minimize that amount of time? And
practically.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's case by case basis there. Yeah. Thanks, Nikki. Other comments here before we talk a little bit about fuel and the effect of that. We've been talking about storage. What do you have? What do you have right now when it hits? And let's hit fuel. Next slide. So the situation for emergency fuel, we've got, this is, okay, we're not talking about storage, but what would it take to make more water, right? So and I'll say it's the average utility, I would say it's kind of a weighted average for population or demand here. It has around 3.5 days of fuel storage, okay? So with that, can make a lot of water. So it ends up with this great number, 207 days of water that we could produce. There's, of course, a lot of things that would have to go into actually making that happen. You know, you need a resilient source. You probably need some backbone because you can't just, you know, turn the water plant on at, you know, 1/100th of its capacity. And so, you know, there could be a gap there because, say, 30% of the respondents don't have both. So you can't just take this 207 days and say we're going to be able to, you know.
Well, and does this look at, I don't understand yet the technology of the water treatment trailers, because if we're talking about like in Clackamas, our water intakes may be compromised to where we can't pull water from the river to use our emergency fuel to make more water.
Yeah.
So how does that fit into this fuel calculation if we're using mobile treatment trailers?
Yeah, and so in some ways you move us to some of our next slides where we're going to talk about emergency equipment. I guess from a big picture standpoint, you could say, well, if I had that much fuel to make, of course, it's going to be less efficient at a smaller scale, but the fuel I have to make water is the fuel I have, so maybe I use it different ways. But we'll talk a little bit about equipment here in a second. Good question.
Yeah, I think part of the point there just is that, you know, fuel is always identified as a huge challenge, and it genuinely will be a challenge after the Cascadia subduction zone. But I think fuel, similar to the water storage equation, is when we think about fuel on an emergency water distribution scale, when we're talking about 2 gallons per person per day, not flushing toilets and having showers, the fuel lasts a lot longer than we think of it. Like 3 days of fuel, if you have a physical way to be able to run a well, for example, for an hour every couple of days or something, if you have a way in your system to run things very intermittently, and I'm not saying that's always the case, that fuel could actually last a long time in this emergency water scenario. So again, it's kind of like the water storage, like we might only have 2 average days of water and we only have 3 days of fuel, but you can make a lot of water on a 2 gallons per person per day basis with those resources. Rebecca.
So fuel will also be needed for other parts of the operation,
of course,
restoration of the system. So how is that factored in here?
This is only very rough. So you're, like I said, there's probably a lot of asterisks after this calculation.
All right, I'll stop asking those.
Yeah, this was just more about how much fuel you have like at your treatment plant or at your wells type of thing. It's not, I don't think most people were responding. It was about how much fuel you have for different types of specific facilities.
Gotcha.
So I get people could use that emergency fuel for other things, but mostly your emergency diesel fuel is not going to be used for your vehicles probably. I don't know. So, and we're not trying to say this means it's all good. It's just putting that lens on it makes you think of it a little bit differently. Like every time we're thinking about emergency water distribution, things last longer and there's different needs than when we're talking about piped water.
Sorry, the gap becomes how do we use that fuel, which is really to your point, Rebecca. Good, next slide. And so as promised, right, we looked a little bit at various terms of other resilience. You know, what do we have in terms of offices that may not collapse, emergency operations centers that might still be standing, or provisions to be able to, for people to be able to make use of that fuel, right? To get water, have water for staff, you know, food for more than a week, et cetera. That's what this looks across, is that these are in some ways the less expensive on the right side, things we could do, and then on the left side, sort of the infrastructure of the human resources. Next slide, I think hand it over to Nikki.
So our breakout room slide is gone, but anyways, we're going to do a breakout room now. I think, no, we're doing emergency water distribution first. That's why. Yes, keep going forward. I'm so breakout room ready. We don't get to do breakout rooms yet.
Almost.
So this is more about the emergency water distribution preparedness. And similar to what we saw at our last workshop, indeed, 80% of the respondents saw a role for utilities in distributing emergency water. So either as being primarily responsible or as being a key support person. And 75% expected to be on their own for a week or more. So 25% thought they were going to be less than a week. So I think the 75% is very likely correct on this one when we're talking about a catastrophic event. So next. So that said, few communities have prepared to deliver emergency water. So even though that 80% said, yes, we have a key role in this, there isn't a really high level of preparation. So this is the percent of respondents. An emergency water distribution plan, we have something like 15%, about 40% have planned where community members can pick up water. Maybe 5% have identified vulnerable members of their community. Nobody has a plan for how to get water to vulnerable community members. Different types, I combine different kinds of equipment here for distributing emergency water. About 35% have invested in that. About 10% have looked at emergency resources for staff, like food and water and things like that for the staff. And then maybe 15% have coordinated with CERT or volunteer groups about distributing emergency water. However, about 93% have promoted 2 weeks ready. And I think that kind of shows that when you have a centralized effort, like the efforts that have gone behind 2 weeks ready, to me, that kind of reduced a barrier for utilities to be able to promote readiness. And a very high proportion of the people who responded have been doing that. So it also points to some of these things, softer things that the RDPO can have an influence in helping promote these types of activities. So I think this is a little bit different than we looked at the seismic storage, for example. A lot of people have invested in seismically resilient storage, which creates this incredible resource. But fewer people have invested in kind of this softer side of things, of the planning of how to do the emergency water. So the good news is this part, I think, is quite less expensive than the seismically resilient storage in many cases. But this kind of points to where some of the gaps are in the region where we could really improve. So, and that's it.
I would just say that the messaging around water has come mostly from the consortium, but amplified by a lot of our partners. And then, of course, there's the 2 weeks ready by the state too. But
of course, thanks. Yeah, so I get that there are multiple people who are hitting that. It's just we haven't been as focused on emergency water distribution, certainly, and I think that's partly why less people have done it.
Well, and you know, one of the things, if your previous slide talks about the role of utilities. I think that is a big philosophical question around water gets to a place, like, are we logistics and transport of water on large scale, or is that a function of the county as part of mass care? So where is the line between the production and the assuring there's water to be distributed and the act of distributing it through other emergency support functions? And so that is a big philosophical question. Some people in the water world think we do everything from start to finish. Some people say, no, we figure out how the logistics arm of the county fits into that, and then it goes out that way, especially if you're crossing organizational with these islands. You know, it's something to think about relative to where do we draw that line around commodity distribution
And
as a role for utilities.
And we actually do have a next slide that kind of goes, that sort of reveals some of the back and forth there, right? Nikki, I don't know if you had any points kind of on this one, because
I would just say we had a huge discussion about that last time, and I think probably next workshop we'll be talking about what we're proposing. I think there has to be some flexibility in it. I think people do see it very differently, and honestly, in different areas, the way you see that if you're Vernonia is different than the way you see that if you're Portland, than the way you see that if you're Clackamas River Water. So I think there has to be some flexibility in the RDPO kind of policies that are going to be put forth. But so I'm going to say we're going to sideline that right now because we talked a lot about it last time. And I think it's a very good point and something that is part of this project, but not a huge focus today.
No, just saying this slide, right? You see that again with that idea of some thinking about more of a role of having some resources to treat water, to get water out there through overland pipe, right? So you do see the utilities having a little bit more on some things on hand to do that versus some of the planning to do that.
This is
so yes,
Kim.
Leslie. Oh,
I had
go
a
ahead,
little
Kim.
comment on that too, and
Sure.
that is, I agree that we all, may not have distribution systems in place, and for good kind of historical reasons, I'll call them, that we've always thought we will be relying on FEMA and that we'll just do some things temporarily to help. But one of the things I think is super important is to actually recognize what you're showing here, that this is the shape we're in now, and we need to plan for it. So being realistic that we haven't planned for it, but we may need to. I think this is super helpful just to see where we're actually sitting. So thanks.
Yeah. Go ahead, Scott. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah. So when we do a lot of our infrastructure repair planning, we look at this as a two-part parallel problem. One, repairing the foundational infrastructure so that we can return to getting it back into people's homes. That applies to water, electrical, roads, sewer. There's also an immediate need. So keep that in mind when we look at these things, is that I want the water providers to help us with the emergent supply of water, but not to the point where it's detracting from the repair and restoration of the fundamental water services. So when we do our planning for emergency management, again, we look at them as parallel.
That is very well put, Scott.
And that also looks at resource management and how are you going to put your limited resources to play? Is the prioritization, is the emergency distribution, the prioritization of resources, and who gets to make that determination, especially if you're in islands and you're not in your service blue sky day type infrastructure.
Yeah, and I get that if it's, as people did agree with, that it might be quite a long time before FEMA shows up So in this really large scale emergency, it's not going to be bottled waters here tomorrow. So, I mean, I think this stored water is a huge resource that we are going to have to rely on in a catastrophic emergency. And certainly if there's been no planning for how to access that resource, it's going to be a lot harder to do so. So this says, I think Taylor covered this.
Yeah, we talked about this. I think our next slide is so we can kind of dive into this with exercises together. Okay. So
we're going to go back into the same breakout groups by county, and you're just going to be looking at the information in those last two sets of presentations, some key pieces of it for your county and showing it by islands. So we're going to be talking about resilient storage available, resilient supply, and emergency water equipment. And what you're going to discuss is what are your county's strengths and what are your significant gaps? And just kind of when you look at that, what does it make you think about your condition as a county? And you're going to be in the same groups with the same facilitators again. So what you're going to, Melissa, are you going to be able to dump them back in the same groups or will they have to select again?
No, they'll need to select again.
Okay. So again, in a moment, she's going to open them. You'll look to the bottom of your screen for the breakout group little symbol, and then you'll pick your county and hit join. It seemed like everyone did it reasonably smoothly last time.
Melissa, can you make the breakout session for 9 minutes?
9, yep.
Yep, thanks.
All right.
No way that was 9 minutes.
You got interrupted mid thought, Kim.
Who thought that went really, really quickly?
It was quick.
I don't think that was 9 minutes. I think somebody did something different.
So I realized people got a little bit cut off. What I'm going to suggest is I'm actually going to do a micro debrief here, and then we're going to get through our other presentations, and then we're going to go back into those same breakout groups. And let's focus on making the presentations as quick as we can while getting the information across to give more time. And then people who weren't finished their conversations from this group can have a few more minutes to complete their thoughts on this issue. Did anyone have anything just stand out incredible to share with the group, or at least moderately interesting? Any of the facilitators? I will say one thing. Oh, go ahead, Kent.
Oh yeah, I want to echo what you're saying here. For Washington County, we had a very robust discussion. There's a few things we just need to go back to confirm. You know, one island, make sure that we have correct information, and that's it. Overall, it's good.
Awesome. For Clark County, one thing we really recognize is because it's all groundwater system, and a lot of the bigger systems have a lot of wells distributed around the region, that's an incredible resource for emergency water. So yes, that's kind of a great resource for Clark County. So I'm going to move forward with the presentation and again, try to give more time for the next breakout group instead, rather than do a half debrief.
So this is the emergency preparedness, which is Kent and I. Kent, do you want to go or do you want me to take it?
Allison, I'll take it. Okay. And the next slide. So for the emergency preparedness, we asked 5 questions. This is the first question essentially is that over the past 5 or 6 years, you know, which plans have you, completed or you're gonna, or the plans you're gonna planning to develop. So, we have out of 40 responses, we have over 50% responded with some very positive news. They have continuity plan in place. We have over half response indicated that they have completed seismic risk assessment. This is very exciting. I think there's some area we need to work on. Essentially, is in terms of emergency operations plan for Cascadia, if a catastrophic event, just like Cascadia earthquake, we only have very limited response. We only have here we only have 7 out of 40. And the other thing is also it's really alarming. I want to point out this out essentially is the relate to the FEMA compliant resource typing. We only have 5 out of 40. So those are the areas I think we need to work on. Ideally we would like to see our bar chart all the way to the right hand side, reach to 40 or very close to 40, right? Next. And the other thing is also we talk about is that, how often do you train your staff on emergency response? And we have roughly about 50% saying that we have completed one training in the past few years. We have 27% says we have done, currently we are doing once a year, and the remaining 23% essentially they have never done, or they're not so sure if they have done any. Obviously our goal is that we want to push everybody to do this once per year. So we want to essentially expand from 20% growth, 27% growth to 85 and 90%. That's our kind of the target we want to go. Next slide. And next one essentially is the to what level have your utility adopted a national incident management system? We have some encouraging news. We have roughly about 15 to 20 responses out of 40 indicated that they have adopted a NIM system. They have done some training. They have internally they have designed incident command system roles within their organization. Obviously we want to do more, right? We want to push our bar chart all the way to 40 if we can over the next a few years if possible. So next. The other one is that when you have activated or exercised your emergency response plan, how well has it worked? And 15% said it worked really well, and 55% response says that yeah, it worked okay. We have some issues, and then the remaining 30% says well, essentially probably have not done much. So I think the encouraging news is that we have roughly about 70% responded that they have done some, they said, well, they went okay. I think that, obviously we want to, see most of our utilities, when they exercise their plan, they want to make sure that, that the whole process will go really well and smooth. That's our goal, right? Next. Next one essentially is, if you, how confident are you that your EOP is adequate for a catastrophic event like a Cascadia earthquake? We give you a scale from 1 to 7. 1 is the least confident, 7 is very confident or most confident. This is a bar chart at the bottom, the pie chart at the bottom. You see that we don't see 6 and a 7. We have 5. We have level, essentially confidence level 1. We have 5%. Level 2 essentially 15%. Level 3 essentially 37%. Those are represents the sort of a low confidence level. If we combine them together, they are already somewhere around 55% or so. And then if we look at the 4 and 5, combined together, that's 43%. Those are the moderate level confidence. We don't have any 6 or 7 high level confidence. I think that's consistent with our regional level preparedness. So that's that's kind of the where we are in terms of our confidence level. Go to next. And then we'll talk about communications. Communications is also, we ask you 5 questions, essentially ask you how you prepared in terms of communicating with your customers, your staff, your sister water utilities, emergency management at the county level, and also other agencies that could provide you with resources. The first question essentially is that what communication device do you plan to use in an emergency to communicate with the staff and other agencies? Generally is, good news is most of the utilities, when they respond, they said they have at least 2 ways to communicate with the staff and other agencies. And cell phones through the standard network is a unanimous one almost. And then we have the, for their alternative, if the cell phone service is down, they are relying on the, some other alternative means to communicate with the staff and other agencies. That includes, citizen band radios, walkie-talkie, ham radios, why not? And, based on, our understanding about interoperability among those devices, I think there might be some, kinks we need to work through. So essentially, if we don't have the standard network in place, we may have some challenges to communicate into utilities potentially. There's some kinks at least some of the kinks we need to work out. Next. And the other thing is also how do you reach out to your customers during an emergency? And generally we see minimum 2 ways to reach out to our customers. Most of the popular ones is social media, which relies on cell phone service. Another one is radio and the TV stations. And if we lose our cell phone services, then notification system in the second one on the bar chart essentially is not going to work either. So the thing is that what's our alternative option? Essentially, we are going to rely on the roadside signs and the door hangers. Both of them we have 19 out of 40 responses. I think those are very, very encouraging and very good to see. Next. And how easy could your employee report to for duty? This is not. I would say it's okay. It's not the best. We only have 42%. Most of the staff living within their service area. And if you look at the rest, essentially is the 58%. They have half of the staff or more than half of the staff. They're not living in their service area. So we may have some challenges, after a major event to report for duty. That's something we need to keep an eye on. Next. And do you have another one? Essentially, is after the event, you may rely on CERT, Community Emergency Response Team, or Neighborhood Emergency Response Team to distribute water, help you. But if you look at our responses here, is only 7 out of 40. That's equivalent to 17%. They know that in their service area they have active CERT, and they are coordinated with them. Essentially, the rest, essentially 83%, is that either they're not coordinated with them, or they're not so sure they're active. So we have a lot of work to work on in this area. Next. So then, if you need additional resource, who are you gonna talk to, right? No surprise, folks are feeling very comfortable talking with the neighboring utilities through informal relationships. We have 31. That's very popular, followed by a county emergency center, which is which makes sense, and Warren or Washington Warren. Another thing I want to also point out, essentially, that we have 23 responses mentioned about they would like to contact Regional Water Providers Consortium. Some of them actually they are not even members of the Regional Water Providers Consortium. So I see that there's maybe we could expand the role of Regional Water Provider Consortium in the future, maybe expand the membership, to facilitate more collaboration with members at this point. Next. Let's talk about a general impression. So we ask you 10 questions. You provide answers based on the breadth and the depth of your response, and in terms of preparedness, your communication, readiness, and all of that. We essentially assigned a scoring system, and we provide a score for every respondent. Okay, and I just put that on the screen for you, just for transparency. It's not our intention to make you look embarrassed. We just want to show you, where everybody is standing relative to each other. That's all. And then if we look at the average score by counties, it's on the screen also. You can take a quick look at it, see where we are on that. This is a score. The total score is a 38 out of that's the total score. So, all right, go to the next one. So the other thing is also we try to do some correlation study to see your self-reporting confidence level, and also the total score based on your response for 10 questions. You can see there's we draw a trend line. The trend line is very positive, going up. So this is a very positive correlation between your confidence and your the level of preparedness in your organization. I'm gonna just let you to look at it for a minute. As you can see, there's no 6 and 7. So for confidence level, and you will see that breakout session as well. This diagram for each county.
So
all right.
I think we're going to go into the breakout session for this one. And I think we can keep the original time on this one, because I think we recovered quite a bit, so that's good. basically we provided some of the information for each county that came out of these kind of the emergency preparedness questions, a little bit of the softer questions and how people feel about how they're prepared. So you can discuss how things are going in your county.
All right, so 15 minutes for this one?
Yep.
All right, I'm just going to try to reopen all the rooms and we'll see if we can, it'll just move everybody back in.
Thanks. I keep forgetting I'm muted when I come back. So welcome back, everybody. I think we had a little bit more time for conversation that time. That was good. Did anyone want to share highlights from their group?
Real quick, so from Clackamas, we talked about some of the gaps being, delegation of authority, right? You got different working together, and so when you have decisions that need to be made that are kind of shared between two executives, and right, it's that whole, we have shared supplies, and so just kind of that we had Clackamas has worked well in terms of strengths of how do we communicate amongst the issues amongst one another, but are we prepared, right, to practice and implement, or would elected officials understand, right, how authority would be shared in a response situation, how do we, so we can confidently act together. Then therefore looking at emergency operation plans through that island view of who's going to have to function together.
Interesting. Awesome. Did anyone else want to share?
I'll go for Washington County.
Great, Ken.
Yeah, in our group we have a very good discussion, and we all Washington County is that we have done a lot of seismic risk assessment, and over the next 5 years they're planning to do a significant amount of mitigation. So those are excellent news. On the gap side, we have some work to do in terms of FEMA compliant resource typing. That's one of the areas we need to work on. Another area essentially is the CERT. Currently, that's a weak link. In Washington County, we need to engage our CERT. In our communities. We spend a lot of time talking about staff reporting for duty after major event. In Washington County, we have 9 out of 11 indicated that half or more than half of their staff cannot report for duty after the event. For a number of reasons. One is they may not be able to come, and the other thing is, their families are safe or not. And with the current housing affordability in Washington County, this situation will get worse. And so one of the things is that we may want to collect some other cities to see how they cope with that kind of situation. We need to talk about rely on all Warren, or Washington Warren as like a mechanism, essentially rely on staff from other utility to help out. And the problem is this, is that, when we do training, we oftentimes don't engage the members from other utilities, in our training. So they don't even understand what our system have, so that's could be, it's a gap for us. So, I think the overall, there's a robust discussion, and I think we understand the gaps in Washington County. So we're going to make sure that I reflect that in our meeting minutes.
So it sounds like we have quite a few different things. I say a lot of our conversation in Clark County was around the fact that they are kind of in good shape from an infrastructure standpoint because of having many wells distributed around. They have resilient storage, but maybe have not done as much planning and coordination. So there's a lot of resources there, but maybe more of a gap in planning and formally connecting the dots on a lot of things. So it sounds like the different groups had quite different conversations. So it'll be interesting once we put all those notes together. I think we're going to, do we have a next step slide, Allison, or are we just giving a next steps?
I probably had a next step slides, but I don't know if it's super critical. Next steps are we're going to take all of this feedback back into those kind of 5 different sections of the framework that we're working on, especially the gap analysis pieces of it. And work towards getting some of those chapters into draft form, and then working into kind of the recommendations for policies and procedures that are recommended from a RDPO standpoint. So the next workshop we're planning on the January timeframe, which will be concentrating mostly on how do we take all of these things that we've identified and move them into recommendations from a regional level that our RDPO can look at. So those are the next steps.
Rebecca had a comment. Do you have your hand up, Rebecca?
Yes, there we go.
Okay.
I know that there are some providers that still haven't done the survey. I don't know if there are any that were in the workshop or not, but are you still taking that information or we drawing a line? But it sounded like there was some gaps still, so I just wanted to clarify.
I'd say we're still taking information. I'd say maybe a 2-week cutoff, Allison. I mean, we can't keep it forever because we're going to start writing up chapters. So let's say 2 weeks from now, if you haven't completed it. And if you're intending to complete it, it'd be great for you to send us a note saying, or Rebecca a note saying, hey, I'm working on it. Just to know that we're waiting for it. That's great. Well, thank you everybody for participating. For me, that went by in like a heartbeat. I can't believe that was 2 hours. That went by so quickly. Anyways, I really appreciate everyone's participation as usual. I think we got some great information and we look forward to talking to you next time around. So, and please don't store all of that draft information that was sent out in the handouts. It is going to be revised and, you know, it's very draft. So let's not store that forever. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Nikki.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.